Welcome to the Supplier Diversity and Inclusion Podcast by Fips Consulting. In this podcast, I speak with international guests who share their experience on supplier diversity and inclusion. Today, I speak to Bonnie Binger. Bonnie is Supplier Inclusion and Diversity Manager at Bayer. Bonnie, thanks so much for being my guest today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So Bayer is really one of the first German-based companies starting with supplier diversity and inclusion. So what was the motivation of Bayer to actually launch its supplier diversity and inclusion efforts in Europe?
Yeah, so before 2021, Bayer focused supplier I&D efforts. We call it supplier I&D at Bayer. We had efforts in the US and in some Latin American countries, primarily Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico. But Bayer is a European headquartered company. And if a topic isn't focused on at headquarters, then it's not given the same level of importance within the organization. So back in 2021, when I came into this role, Bayer had diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DE&I efforts with respect to talent and the workplace globally, but our DE&I efforts in the supply chain were only in the North and South Americas. This didn't make sense because we are headquartered in Germany. We were motivated to ensure that we were tracking spend with diverse-owned businesses in Europe in addition to the Americas, but we didn't want to ignore the Middle East, Africa, or all of Asia. So we were motivated to ensure that our supplier I&D program was aligned with our global DE&I efforts. The increased efforts within Europe to promote supplier I&D and to advocate for diverse-owned businesses are also a big motivator for expanding efforts in Europe. Some of the non-governmental organizations or NGOs Bayer works with have increased their focus in Europe. I'm thinking primarily about We Connect International and Disability In, and there are newer NGO players in Europe as well. So the European Supplier Diversity Program, or ESDP, is emerging in Europe as the leader in empowering ethnic minority and immigrant-owned businesses across European markets. So having NGOs that we can partner with to focus on supplier I&D in Europe is incentive to increase our focus there. And you're familiar with some of the legislation that's been enacted and that is coming in Europe, focused on the environment and human rights in supply chains. One of the big ones is the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. And though there isn't currently legislation that guides supplier diversity efforts in Europe, corporations that are engaged in this topic now have the opportunity to provide input on what future guidelines could be and will be in a better position to respond to any legislation that is enacted. And of course, this is a big motivator for me to be working on supplier I&D in Europe already.
Wow, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this with us. So I understand that you actually had your D&I strategy internally in HR, and then you kind of expanded the same also definitions into the supply chain and looking at the underrepresented groups also in your supplier diversity and inclusion efforts.
That's right. Yeah. And globally, we focus on the categories of women, people with disabilities, and LGBTQ+. We had business resource groups at the global level for those categories of diversity. So, thinking about talent and workplace inclusion. And so it made sense for those categories to also be the global categories of diversity for our supplier inclusion and diversity program. So yeah, we want to be aligned there.
Right. So when I listen to you, I assume you are sitting in the US. So where are you located?
Yeah, so I'm in St. Louis in the United States, so I'm right in the middle of the country, and it's a good place to be. I love it here in St. Louis.
Very good, very good. So how do you go about it? I mean, you're the globally responsible for supplier diversity and inclusion. So how do you make sure that you also have your folks outside of the US motivated to support the whole program and all the efforts that you do?
Yeah, so you need champions, right? And I began looking for those within the organization who were interested in getting engaged in supplier I&D efforts outside of the Americas and invited them to be advocates for the program. Um, we had some memberships and relationships with NGOs in the Americas, but we also added NGO memberships when we took the program global. So these NGOs help us to identify the diverse owned businesses that we currently have in our supply chain, but also identify new diverse owned businesses that we can contract with in the future. And we also leverage these NGOs to learn more about the challenges that diverse communities face in different regions. And we can connect Bayer representatives in the different regions with the committees, councils, advisory groups, industry groups, et cetera, that these NGOs facilitate to help Bayer be engaged in diversity efforts in different regions. We also partner with the NGOs we have memberships with to connect Bayer professionals to opportunities to mentor diverse owned businesses in different parts of the world. And sometimes these relationships are just for a few months, and sometimes they're year-long programs. But these kinds of programs, they help us to better understand the capabilities of suppliers that we wouldn't otherwise have considered for contract opportunities. And these NGOs also have conferences and symposiums in Europe that are and other parts of the world that are hosted by organizations like We Connect International, the European LGBTQ plus Chamber of Commerce, and the European Supplier Diversity Program, or ESDP. And these are good opportunities for those champions within our company to attend, network with other corporate peers, and to meet with diverse suppliers. And so leveraging the local champions and our NGO memberships have really been key in our efforts to expand our supplier I&D efforts. I think champions are really important to the success of a program.
Right. Champions are very important, but also getting the buy-in from the whole company, right? So I guess this is something that you also have been looking at, and you mentioned the mentoring piece. So I had the pleasure to work with Bayer and We Connect International on a great project which was called or is still ongoing, Elevate. So maybe you can share some about that, because that's really an exciting program that was going on also in Brazil and Mexico, if I remember correctly. And yeah, but let us know more about Elevate at Bayer.
Yeah, so we started partnership with We Connect International on a program we conducted in Mexico in 2022. This program we called Bayer and We Connect's Great Idea, where IDEA stood for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access. This was training and mentoring for women-owned businesses. And then in 2023, we replicated the program in Brazil, and we called it Ampliando Saberes, and this means expanding knowledge in Portuguese. And for this, we focused specifically on businesses owned by women of color, because this is an area of focus for our DEI organization in Brazil. And to inspire adoption of supplier I&D in Europe, we launched the Bayer and We Connect International Elevate program for women-owned businesses in Germany and Switzerland this year. And we've really taken the training and mentoring to the next level in this program. This program is helping women-owned businesses learn more about how to do business with Bayer, but it's also helping more people within Bayer to consider working with diverse-owned companies. And you've been instrumental in bringing this program to life. So thank you for your help with that.
Thank you so much. It's so much fun, and it's so great to see also how your people at Bayer are so motivated. We had some introductions of the mentors and the mentees already. So what did you do, or how did you go about really getting the whole company engaged in these programs like Elevate, but also supporting supplier diversity and inclusion overall?
Yeah, it's a good question. I communicate almost constantly with my procurement organization. They're probably tired of hearing from me, but I've published 15 articles in the 5 months of 2024 so far on this platform we use internally to share information with each other. So I do my best to share information, for example, about International Women's Day and the impact our supplier inclusion and diversity efforts have supporting women-owned businesses, but I also share opportunities to get engaged in virtual matchmaking, in-person events, conferences, or opportunities to be mentors or judges. And I also ask the organization to celebrate when Bayer receives recognition for our supplier inclusion and diversity efforts. And beyond just the procurement team, I also try to ensure that I'm connecting with the business stakeholders, the ones who hold the budget and are ultimately responsible for making sourcing decisions. And this is an ongoing effort. But in terms of influencing the Bayer organization to work with diverse owned businesses, the primary thing I'm doing is asking them to look in different places than what they're used to when they are seeking suppliers. And this is a good thing because it means that we're increasing the number of suppliers in the pool that we're considering. But this takes effort, so I make sure to let my colleagues know that the Supplier I&D team is here to help find diverse suppliers that they can invite to compete for business with Bayer. So they're not alone in this. And I think that's a big help to getting them engaged.
Yeah, I think too. And as you mentioned, right, you got procurement, but you got the budget holders. So they also have a huge influence on what you buy and also where you potentially buy from. And it's really important that they're on board and that they are also understanding why you do what you do, and that they might look for different suppliers than just the same old, right?
Right. And that connection to DE&I think is critical as well, because I feel like within our organization, people are more familiar with the DE&I efforts that we have with respect to talent and recruiting and retaining diverse talent and having an inclusive workplace. So sharing as much as I can about this DE&I effort in the supply chain helps them to see that alignment with our overall DE&I aspirational goals.
Yeah, perfect. And I think that's very important to see that connection, because I always say, DE and I is not something just to be looked at internally or in one way. It should really be a holistic um, thing. So not just looking internally at the workforce, but also at kind of naturally you have a diverse client base, but then you can also influence on your suppliers, what you buy and where you buy from, like, really having a huge impact on that as well.
Yeah.
So I know, this is all nice and good, and but I think you also have to kind of convince some people, and also, making sure that they are also understanding kind of business benefits, because it's all good and nice to have, but at the end of the day, most of the companies also want to see, okay, so what's in it for us, right? So what is our return of investment here? So what do you see, or also what does Bayer see as really the big business benefit for having DE&I internally, but also especially in the supply?
Yeah, the benefits are many, and we've already discussed that connection to DE&I. But um, I also see the ripple effect of diverse-owned suppliers giving back within their own communities. And I know many companies, diverse and those that are not diverse-owned, have corporate social responsibility or community outreach initiatives. But I'm so impressed by the efforts that I see diverse suppliers making to advocate for those in their communities. There are quite a few examples of this, and you see it with businesses owned by women, people with disabilities, et cetera. But one of the Black-owned businesses we work with has about 1,000 employees, and 62% of them are women. And so that's higher representation than you see women represented in society. and 88% represent some other form of diversity. They're people of color, people with disabilities, LGBTQ plus, or some other identity associated with a marginalized group. So they're hiring groups that have been historically excluded from workplaces and the marketplace at a much higher rate than those people are represented in society. They're giving more people who have been historically discriminated against a chance at being successful through employment. And this company in particular also provides financial literacy training for their employees. In addition, the same Black-owned business goes above and beyond in supporting STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and math initiatives for kids in their local community. They've made themselves a true asset in their community. And again, I know that many companies support efforts like this, but diverse-owned businesses are more likely to give back to the communities they represent. And these are the kinds of benefits that Bayer wants to be associated with. Working with suppliers that offer high quality goods and services at a competitive price that also give back in the community is a business benefit to Bayer. And I should also mention that the diverse-owned businesses Bayer works with offer the highest quality goods and services. They're good at what they do, and we contract with them not out of pity because they're owned by someone from a marginalized group, but because the solutions they provide are innovative and their prices are fair. So there are, many business benefits to doing business with diverse-owned suppliers.
Right. I think that's very important. It's no charity. It's no positive discrimination, right? It's all about
Right.
business. You still have to provide the best price, product, and service, and deliver everything that's needed. So I love the stories because it shows how much can be influenced and impacted with including diverse businesses in your supply chain, because it has such a, as you mentioned, such a ripple effect that it really goes down to so many people. And if you kind of compare this with DE&I in the workforce, it's also great that and it's needed and it's important, but the impact that can achieve is just not to be compared, or it can almost not be compared to what you can do in the supply chain. And I just love these stories, and I think this is really probably also what you can share internally and get everybody's buy-in, because as lots of sourcing decisions are made outside of procurement, and there it's really important that these have the opportunities and the budget to support buying from diverse businesses.
Yeah, and these are part of the success stories that I like to communicate, right, to inspire people to get engaged and to consider diverse-owned businesses. Yeah, these success stories inspire me as well.
Right. And the thing is, there are probably not hundreds of them, but you would love to have more, right? So
Right.
always on the lookout for the great stories. But so how is it in reality when you have like an opportunity? Do you have like policies? Do you look specifically for diverse suppliers to be included in opportunities, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we just changed here at Bayer some of our policies. We're in the midst of busting some bureaucracy, so there are a lot of changes taking place. But we are intentional about including diverse suppliers in the sourcing events that we conduct. It's a little more challenging in the directs space. So when we're sourcing for active ingredients, raw materials, or even finished goods, there are fewer diverse suppliers to choose from, fewer suppliers in general, right? And for those that we do business with, we have to thoroughly vet them, and there are some insurance requirements, et cetera. And so we find a lot more opportunity in the indirects space. So for goods and services in categories like marketing and sales and IT, HR, legal services, things in our own site operations, R&D, and other categories like that. And these are the areas where there are a few categories for which we ensure that we include at least one diverse supplier in every RFP. And in these indirect categories, there are many more diverse suppliers doing business. So, and they may be small businesses, but they can compete and win RFPs based on their unique approaches to solving problems or delivering services. And as I mentioned, that's exactly the kind of innovation that we're looking for in suppliers. And so we are deliberate in some of these categories, but in that direct space, we know there's a little more challenge. We're absolutely considering diverse suppliers when there are diverse suppliers that should be considered there. But the real opportunity that we have and where we focus a lot more effort is in that indirect space.
Wow. Well, that's already great that you are adjusting the policies just for the indirect space. And I'm sure with, more diverse businesses kind of being visible, there's probably also more opportunities for in the direct space. So you have a kind of, you're kind of one of the newer corporates who have expanded your supplier diversity program from the US to Europe. Is there any key advice that you can share for a company that is either just starting off in Europe or is their supplier diversity and inclusion efforts into Europe from the US?
Yeah, so some of the advice that I got was to do what makes sense for your firm, for your company. I think it's important to have a program in the markets that are key for your company's overall diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And it was definitely important for Bayer, being a German headquartered company, to have Supplier I&D in Germany, for example. I'd also recommend ensuring that there's a connection with the overall diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DE&I efforts at the company. Because I sit in procurement, I have a more direct relationship with procurement and a more indirect relationship with DE&I that sits in Bayer's HR organization. But my connection to them is critical for ensuring that we are aligned on the categories of diversity that we focus on, and that we can work together on the benchmarking surveys and company award nominations that we both contribute to. And you mentioned leadership earlier. I think that having both leadership support and champions deeper in the organization are important for the ultimate success of a supplier I&D program, no matter in what region you're operating. So I'd start looking for those leaders and champions who you can leverage in the regions. So when you need a testimonial or a speaker or someone to help with a pilot project about which you can tell a success story later, you have people who you can ask to be involved. So that's a little bit of advice from me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you just mentioned something that I would love to hear more if you want to share company awards. What is that at Bayer?
So the one that we just recently received was the top global champion for supplier diversity and inclusion from We Connect International, but also many of the partners that We Connect International works with. So these awards were just announced in May of 2024, and Bayer received for a second year in a row the silver designation, silver category designation for as a top global champion. And this acknowledges our efforts to have a global supplier inclusion and diversity program. And yeah, it honors the contributions that we've made. And there are still the gold and the platinum levels above the silver where we currently sit. So there's opportunity for improvement still for Bayer, and we're working to achieve those higher levels in the future. And these awards are, they mean a lot. We celebrate the success of earning awards like this internally. We also share on our external website that we've achieved these awards, and that's important for the employees. But when it comes to these kinds of diversity, equity, and inclusion awards, it's also something that talent, potential talent for the future, look at when they're evaluating employers they want to work for. If a company is receiving awards in this diversity, equity, and inclusion space, that shows they're a great place to work. And so people want to apply for and interview for jobs there. And I think it matters to customers as well, consumers who are buying our products. They want to ensure that we're an ethical company focused on diversity and inclusion and that equity matters to us. And so I think it's really important that we nominate ourselves for these awards and that we share that we've received them as well.
Right. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's great. But I think, spot on what you said. It's receiving these awards, right? But then also talking about it and really make it visible, also externally, not just internally, because internally it's important as well, right? To get really everybody seeing what you do has an impact, and it creates some visibility also then that you can share externally. And it's kind of a chain reaction, right? It shows that you're so engaged in DE&I, which means that it also attracts diverse talents and so on and so on. So it really has again, a ripple effect there. And I think key is really to communicate and talk about it, because you can get an award and just put it in a drawer and nobody talks about it, right? But you really have to also talk about the good things that you do to really get an effect from it. Wow, Bonnie, thank you so much. Just two little things at the end. As a diverse, small, women-owned business, I love to work with you, and I'm sure there are many others who are keen to work with Bayer after they listen to this podcast or even before. What's a key advice or something that you can share you have to do to actually work with Bayer?
Yeah, so one of the things that we focused on with the Bear and We Connect International Elevate program is to help the women-owned businesses better understand Bear. For example, we have 3 divisions to our business: crop science, pharmaceuticals, and consumer health. And environmental, social, and governance, or ESG topics, are highly significant to us. So we provided training on a couple of the industries that we operate in and on sustainability. And a recommendation I like to give diverse-owned businesses is to get to know more about Bear, especially before you try to pitch to us about your business. If you review what we share externally and pay attention to what our leaders talk about publicly, you'll understand that sustainability, human rights, and DEI are important topics for us. And what we're interested in hearing about from any supplier, but especially from diverse-owned businesses that would like to engage us, is how you can help us solve the challenges we face while doing business with us. So doing some research in advance before approaching a corporation will help you be more successful in winning business with it. Of course, we also have a diverse supplier portal where we encourage any diverse-owned business to register their interest in doing business with Bayer, and that can be found on our bayer.com supplier diversity webpage. So you can Google that and get right to it. And there's a link on the right to register your business there. So also encourage businesses to do that for us too.
Cool. So is there a field where they can say, okay, I'm a diverse business and this is the challenge I'm going to help you with solving? Or how, when I hear this, it's like, okay, so I can help you solve this problem, but where should I sign up now?
Yeah. So we have a capabilities field where you can enter your capabilities, and rather than just listing, the specific sources, the goods and services that you provide, be specific there. If you've done your research, share with us, what niche opportunity you provide and what problems you can help solve. And thinking about it from what's important to Bayer from that perspective, I think will help us really be compelled to invite you to that upcoming RFP.
Right. I think that's just also a great advice. Just share your USP, right? There are
Yeah.
so many companies who do, I don't know, professional services, but what is it that stands out at your company? What is your USP? So, yeah, great advice. Thank you so much. we're almost at the end, and time just went by like this. But is there like one last thing that you would like to share this podcast?
Yeah. So I know that diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DE&I, is a topic that is more popular and more well understood in some regions than in others. And as we've expanded our Supplier I&D program in recent years, I've encountered people who sincerely feel like the world has moved beyond the wrongs of the past, and that diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't a topic that needs to be focused on everywhere anymore. But the thing is that DE&I efforts are meant not only to advance those who have been marginalized to be equally represented in society, but to ensure that everyone is included and feels like they belong. That's in our workplaces, in schools, and in all the institutions that help our society function. I hope that one day we don't need to have people in jobs like the one I have promoting the use of diverse-owned suppliers, but I expect that there will always be efforts to ensure that everyone feels like they can fully participate and be themselves. We may not classify those roles as DE&I in the future, but that's how we will ensure that everyone can fully contribute and that we can maximize those contributions to have the biggest impact. And I just want to share a big thank you with you, Andrea, for facilitating discussions on topics like this, because I think we do still need to be focusing on these areas. And I really appreciate the opportunity to get the word out about the Bayer Supplier Inclusion and Diversity Program.
Well, thank you so much, Bonnie, for being here, being my guest, and sharing your insights, because I think it's always so important to see that companies like Bayer are really, putting so much effort into a more inclusive supply chain and also internally. And I think it's just what you said, right? We're still not there. And I also wish we wouldn't have to work in this area and everything would just be equal, no bias, right? Everyone has the same chances and opportunities, but we're not there. And I think it's amazing and so good that we have companies, also non-US companies, that are looking at this now and are really promoting supplier D&I, as you call it, at Bayer in Europe and just outside of the US. So thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for sharing all the insights and also your thoughts on supplier diversity and inclusion. So I hope we'll get to work together again. But thank you so much, Bonnie, for being my guest.
Thank you.
And if you want to make your supply chain more inclusive, reach out via fipsconsulting.com or Fips Consulting on LinkedIn. Listen in to my next episodes where I talk to more experts about supplier diversity and inclusion and the impact it has on their company or organization. Reach out if you have any inputs or topics around supplier diversity and inclusion you want me to talk about. Thanks much for listening, and bye, Diverse Own.